The city of Doro, nestled between rolling hills and a winding river, was a bustling community of traders, farmers, and artisans. The market square was always alive with the sounds of battering, laughter, and the clinking of tools. But behind this lively facade lay a simmering struggle, one that the people of the low-income housing compound knew all too well. Yemi was one of them. A hardworking single mother in her late 20s, she lived in a cramped one-room home with her 6-year-old son, Tolu. Yemi made a living selling akara, fried bean cakes, at the market. Her days were long, her nights short, but she always found time to sit with Tolu, helping him learn to read and write on a small slate. Tolu was a bright, curious boy who loved asking questions and making up stories. Despite their struggles, he brought light into Yemi's life with his infectious laughter and endless optimism. Next door lived Zainab, a widow in her 40s who was like a sister to Yemi. Zainab had a sharp tongue but an even sharper sense of justice. She often looked out for Yemi and Tolu, sharing food and advice whenever she could. Zainab earned her living weaving baskets, her strong hands moving with practiced skill. Overseeing the compound was Mr. Tunde, the landlord. A stout, middle-aged man with a perpetually furrowed brow, Mr. Tunde was infamous for his ruthless ways. He owned several properties across Doro, and his tenants feared him. He raised rents without warning, evicted families without mercy, and seemed to care only about lining his pockets. His shiny black car and expensive suits stood in stark contrast to the lives of those he exploited. The other tenants of the compound were a diverse mix of families and individuals, each with their own stories of hardship and resilience. From Mama Ade, the elderly woman who sold roasted corn, to young Bola, the shoemaker with dreams of opening his own shop, they all shared one thing: a struggle to make ends meet in the face of Mr. Tunde's greed. This was Doro, a city of contrasts, where the joys of community often clashed with the harsh realities of survival. And it was here, in the shadow of the hills, that an extraordinary tale of courage and unity was about to unfold. The rent increase. Yemi sat on the wooden stool in her one-room home, watching Tolu scribble on his slate with chalk. The faint sound of a knock interrupted the quiet evening. She opened the door to find Zainab, her kind neighbor. "Yemi, did you hear?" Zainab asked, her voice trembling. "Hear what?" "Mr. Tunde is raising the rent again. He's giving everyone just 2 weeks to pay or leave." Yemi's heart sank. "But that's unfair. How can he do this with no warning?" "That's Mr. Tunde for you," Zainab said bitterly. "He's greedy and doesn't care about anyone but himself." Yemi's mind raced. She had barely managed to pay last month's rent, and now this. She clenched her fist, knowing she had to do something. But what? She gazed at Tolu, who was humming a tune as he played with his chalk. The thought of losing their small home filled her with dread. She couldn't let this happen. Not now, not ever. Zainab noticed Yemi's troubled expression and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Maybe there's something we can do together," she offered. "You're not alone in this." "Thank you, Zainab," Yemi whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was certain: she wouldn't give up without a fight. A meeting of minds. The next morning, Yemi and Zainab gathered with a few of the compound's tenants in Zainab's small home. The air was heavy with worry, but there was also a spark of determination. Mama Ade, Bola, and 2 other neighbors, Fatima and Kola, sat on mismatched chairs and stools, their faces lined with concern. We cannot just sit and let this happen, Zainab began, her voice firm. If we don't stand up to Mr. Tunde, he'll keep doing this to us. But what can we do? Fatima asked, wringing her hands. He's the landlord. He has the power. Maybe he does, Yemi said, speaking up for the first time, but we have each other. If we work together, we can fight back. We just need a plan. Mama Ade nodded slowly. Yemi is right. Alone, we are weak. But together, we can be strong. What if we refuse to pay until he listens to us? That's risky, Bola said. He could just evict us all. Or he could realize that without us, he'll have no income, Zainab countered. If we stand united, he can't afford to lose us all. The room fell silent as everyone considered the idea. Finally, Kola spoke up. We'll need to spread the word to the other tenants. If even one person doesn't agree, it could weaken our position. I can talk to the women in the market, Yemi offered. Many of them live here too. And I'll speak to the men at the workshop, Bola said. We'll make sure everyone understands what's at stake. The group spent the next hour discussing their strategy. By the time they left Zainab's home, there was a newfound sense of purpose among them. They were no longer just tenants, they were a community, united against a common enemy. As Yemi returned to her room, she felt a glimmer of hope. The battle ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Over the next few days, the tenants began reaching out to others in the compound. Yemi walked through the bustling market, her tray of akara balanced perfectly on her head. As she handed a piece to a young boy, she whispered to his mother, "We're holding a meeting tonight to discuss the rent increase. Can we count on you?" The woman hesitated, looking around nervously. "I'll try to come," she said. "But you know how Mr. Tunde is. If he finds out..." "He won't," Yemi assured her. "We are stronger together. Please think about it." Meanwhile, Bola was busy at the workshop, chatting with the men during their lunch break. "I know it's risky," he said, "but this is our chance to stand up for ourselves. If we don't do something now, he'll just keep taking advantage of us." "What if he evicts us?" one of the men asked. "Then we'll face that together," Bola replied. "But if we let fear stop us, nothing will ever change." By the time evening came, a small crowd had gathered in the compound's courtyard. Zainab stood at the front, her voice ringing out with confidence. "We all know why we're here. Mr. Tunde thinks he can bully us because he owns this place. But what he doesn't realize is that we have something he doesn't, each other." The crowd murmured in agreement, their initial hesitation giving way to a growing sense of unity. Mama Ade stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady. "I've lived here for 30 years. I've seen landlords come and go. But this one, he's the worst. If we don't stand up to him now, who will?" The tenants began to nod, their resolve strengthening. Yemi looked around, seeing faces she'd known for years now lit with determination. For the first time, she felt they truly had a chance. The tenants' plan was simple but bold. They decided to draft a letter outlining their grievances and deliver it to Mr. Tunde as a united front. Yemi and Zainab took the lead in writing it, carefully listing each point: the sudden rent increases, the lack of maintenance in the compound, and the unreasonable eviction threats. On the day of the confrontation, a group of 20 tenants marched to Mr. Tunde's office, their letter in hand. Yemi held Tolu's hand tightly as they walked, her heart pounding in her chest. Zainab walked beside her, her expression a mix of determination and anger. When they arrived, Mr. Ton's secretary looked up in surprise. "What is this?" she asked. "We're here to see Mr. Ton," Zainab said firmly. "It's important." The secretary hesitated, then went to inform her boss. Moments later, Mr. Ton appeared, his face dark with irritation. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Yemi stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "We've come to deliver this letter, sir. It outlines our concerns as your tenants." Mr. Ton snatched the letter from her hand and scanned it quickly, his scowl deepening with each line. "This is nonsense," he said, tossing the letter onto his desk. "If you don't like my rules, you can leave. All of you." Zainab stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You can't just throw us out, Mr. Ton. We know our rights. If you won't negotiate with us, we'll take this matter to the community leader." Mr. Ton's lips thinned, and he glared at the group. "Do whatever you like," he spat. "But don't expect me to back down." The tenants left the office with mixed feelings. They had stood up to Mr. Ton, but his reaction had shown just how difficult this fight would be. Still, as Yemi looked at the determined faces around her, she knew they couldn't give up now. The confrontation with Mr. Ton had left the tenants shaken but not broken. As word of their bold move spread, it sparked conversations throughout the compound and beyond. In the market, Yemi overheard women whispering about the group's defiance. "Did you hear about the tenants who stood up to Mr. Ton?" one woman said, wrapping smoked fish in a banana leaf. "I didn't think anyone would dare." "Maybe they'll make him think twice," another added, her voice hopeful. "That man has been exploiting people for too long." Back at the compound, Zainab gathered the group to discuss their next steps. Bola spoke first, his voice filled with frustration. "He's not going to listen to us. We need to do more than just deliver letters." "What do you suggest?" Yemi asked. Bola leaned forward. "We take this to the community council. If they back us, Mr. Ton won't have the power to ignore us." Mama Ade nodded in agreement. "The council is fair. They won't stand for his greed." The group decided to draft a petition, collecting signatures from as many tenants as possible. They worked tirelessly, going door to door explaining their cause. Fatima, who had been hesitant before, became one of their strongest advocates, rallying women from the market to sign. By the week's end, they had gathered over 50 signatures. The petition was ready. Yemi, Zainab, and Bola volunteered to present it to the council. As they prepared for the meeting, Yemi felt a mixture of nerves and hope. This was their chance to make a real change. The sun was barely up when Yemi, Zainab, and Bola made their way to the community council building. The streets of the Koro were quiet, save for the occasional rooster crowing in the distance. Each of them carried a copy of the petition, their signatures neatly aligned, a symbol of the tenants' unity and determination. The community council building was a modest structure, its walls painted a dull beige. Inside, the air was cool, and the smell of fresh ink and paper lingered. They were greeted by Mrs. Adebayo, the council secretary, a woman in her 50s with a warm but professional demeanor. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked, glancing at the documents in their hands. "We're here to file a petition against our landlord, Mr. Ton," Yemi said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. We need the council's support. Mrs. Adebayo raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Please, have a seat, she said, motioning to a set of wooden chairs. I'll notify the chairman. The three sat in silence, their nerves growing with each passing minute. Finally, the door to the chairman's office opened, and an elderly man with a kind face stepped out. Chairman Onifade was known for his fairness and wisdom, a man respected by all of the Koro. Good morning, he greeted them, his voice calm and reassuring. I've been informed of your petition. Please, come inside. Once seated in his office, Yemi handed over the petition. Chairman Onifade read through it carefully, his expression thoughtful. When he finally looked up, his gaze was serious but empathetic. This is a well-documented grievance, he said. If what you've outlined here is true, Mr. Tan's actions are not only unethical but potentially illegal. The council will investigate these claims thoroughly. A wave of relief washed over the trio. Zainab spoke up, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you, Chairman. We just want a fair chance to live without constant fear of eviction. Chairman Onifade nodded. You've taken a brave step. I'll schedule a hearing and invite Mr. Tunde to respond to these allegations. In the meantime, I advise you all to remain calm and united. Change doesn't happen overnight, but with perseverance, it does happen. As they left the council building, Yemi felt a sense of accomplishment. For the first time, it seemed like justice might be within reach. News of the council's involvement spread quickly through the compound. For the tenants, it was a glimmer of hope, but for Mr. Tunde, it was a direct challenge to his authority. In the days leading up to the council hearing, the compound buzzed with activity. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now came together to share meals, stories, and encouragement. Mama Ade organized a small prayer circle, while Bola took charge of preparing statements for the hearing. Even Tolu sensed the importance of the moment, drawing pictures of people holding hands and smiling. But the calm was not without its cracks. Late one evening, Yemi found a note slipped under her door. The handwriting was messy and anonymous, but the message was clear. Stop this foolishness, or there will be consequences. Her hands trembled as she showed the note to Zainab. Do you think it's from Mr. Tunde? She whispered. Zainab's jaw tightened. Probably. He's trying to scare us. But we can't let him win. The next day, Zainab called a meeting under the Baobab tree. Some of you may have received threats, she said, her voice firm. But that's exactly what he wants. He wants us to give up. Are we going to let him bully us back into silence? No, the crowd responded, their voices strong and united. Yemi stood up, holding the note. I'm scared, but I know that if we don't fight now, we'll be living in fear forever. We have to stay strong. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, as Yemi tucked Tolu into bed, he asked, Mama, are we going to win? She kissed his forehead and smiled. Yes, my love. We are going to win because we're doing what's right. But deep in her heart, she knew the battle was far from over. Mr. Tunde was not a man to back down easily, and the storm was only just beginning. The day of the hearing arrived, and the community council building was filled with an air of tension and anticipation. The tenants of the compound arrived early, dressed in their best clothes as a sign of respect for the council. Yemi held Tolu's hand tightly, while Zainab and Bola walked ahead, carrying the petition and other supporting documents. Mr. Tunde arrived shortly after, his presence commanding and intimidating. Dressed in a tailored suit, he looked every bit the wealthy landlord. His lawyer, a sharp-looking man with a briefcase, followed closely behind. The sight of him made Yemi's stomach churn, but she stood her ground. Chairman Onifed called the meeting to order, his voice cutting through the low murmurs in the room. We are here to address the grievances brought forth by the tenants of Mr. Tunde's compound. Let us begin with the petition. Zainab stepped forward, her voice steady as she read aloud the complaints: unreasonable rent hikes, lack of maintenance, and threats of eviction. She spoke of the tenants' struggles, painting a vivid picture of the hardships they endured under Mr. Tunde's rule. When she finished, Mr. Tunde's lawyer stood. With all due respect, these accusations are baseless. My client has every right to manage his property as he sees fit. The tenants are simply refusing to uphold their end of the agreement. The tenants murmured in protest, but Chairman Onifed raised his hand for silence. We will hear both sides. Mr. Tunde, do you have anything to say? Mr. Tunde stood, his expression cold. I have always acted within the law. If these tenants cannot afford the rent, they are free to leave. It is not my responsibility to subsidize their living. His words hung in the air, heavy with disdain. Yemi felt her anger rise, but she bit her tongue, knowing this was not the time to lose composure. The hearing continued with testimonies from both sides. Mama Ade spoke of the years she had lived in the compound, her voice quivering as she recounted the constant fear of eviction. Bola presented evidence of the lack of repairs, including photos of leaking roofs and broken water pipes. By the end of the session, Chairman Onifed announced that the council would deliberate and reconvene in 3 days to deliver their verdict. As the tenants left the building, their spirits were a mix of hope and uncertainty. The fight was far from over, but they had made their voices heard.
Thank you so much for watching this far. The journey of Yemi, Zainab, and the tenants of Doro is far from over, and the stakes only get higher in part 2. Don't miss the thrilling conclusion where justice is put to the ultimate test. If you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2. And if you enjoyed this story, please give this video a like, it helps us reach more people with inspiring tales like this. See you in part 2.